Thanks for listening to another episode of School Counseling Simplified, or for viewing another episode if you're watching this. I am so excited. Today we have our very first podcast guest. We have Richard Capriola, and he is here to talk to us about adolescent substance abuse and his new book. So, welcome, Richard. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Rachel. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate you giving me some time to talk about my book and this important topic of adolescent substance abuse.
Yes, absolutely. So, to get started, please tell us a little bit about who you are and just your background and education.
Well, I'm originally from Illinois. I was born in Illinois, went to school in Illinois, went to college at Western Illinois University in Macomb and the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. I worked in the field of education for about 32 years with the Illinois State Board of Education. I had a number of roles during that time. I was involved with governmental relations as a lobbyist for education. I went on to assume responsibility as a special assistant to the state superintendent of education, where I was responsible for communications and external relations. I retired after 30 some years of education work for the State Board of Education. And that's when I got involved in mental health and substance abuse counseling.
Very interesting. Wow. So, you have quite a long history in education, then, quite the background.
Yes, quite a tenure in education, and it was quite an experience. I enjoyed education and working with educators throughout the state of Illinois.
And when you said you got involved into the substance abuse field, what did that look like? How did you get involved and what did you begin to do?
Well, while I was working for the State Board of Education, I also took a part-time position working for a regional mental health crisis center. And we would take patients from the emergency room into the crisis center, and we would house them for a short period of time. And I noticed that a large number of patients coming from the hospital not only had a mental health issue, they had a substance abuse issue as well.
Mm.
So I went back to the University of Illinois, got another master's degree in this one in addictions counseling. I continued to work for the crisis center for a number of years until I was offered a position at Menninger Clinic in Houston, Texas. Menninger Clinic is a psychiatric hospital that treats both adolescents and adults. And I was hired as an addictions counselor for both adolescents and adults. And I worked for over a decade at Menninger as an addictions counselor. And I just retired maybe about a year and a half ago.
Okay. Well, congratulations on your recent retirement. Although, if you're writing books, it sounds like you're not relaxing too much. You're still.
Well, this pandemic has sort of kept my wife and myself, from doing as much traveling as we had planned, but we are looking forward to getting back to that. But I did take the time as an opportunity to write this book for families and parents, because so many of the parents that I talked to after I had explained their child's history of using alcohol or drugs and given them the diagnosis, they would look at me and they would say something like, I had no idea this was going on. Or if they did suspect their child was using a substance, they would say, well, I thought something was going on, but I didn't know it was this bad. So I wanted to write a very non-technical, concise, short book that would give parents the information they need so that they would feel better informed about adolescent substance abuse. And also teachers and educators as well, because they're on sort of the front line with dealing with these adolescents. So I also intended for it to be a resource for counselors and for teachers so that they would have the basic information on adolescent substance abuse.
Absolutely. And I like that you mentioned it was concise because you said fewer than 100 pages, right?
It runs around 107 pages. Each
Okay.
chapter is short and concise.
And I think that's so important just to make it digestible and attainable. And we want it to feel approachable for parents and educators, not like a big textbook, but just real strategies that they can use to help their children and students.
That was my goal. I'm glad to hear
Mhm.
you say that. That was my goal. I wanted it to be a book that a parent or a teacher or a counselor could read in a very short period of time and walk away with the idea that, okay, I've got this. I understand it better now than I did before.
Right. So you told us a little bit about why you decided to write this book, but what does the book cover? Can you kind of give us a little summary or breakdown of what it covers and how this is helpful for educators and parents?
It has short chapters with explanation and information on the street drugs that children might be exposed to. So, for example, they can learn about marijuana, they can learn about cocaine, they can learn about LSD, the basics of those drugs. It has a chapter that talks about the extent of substance use among the adolescent population today. So, readers can very quickly get a handle on what drugs and substances adolescents are using. It's a brief overview of what's going on in America with adolescent substance abuse. It has a chapter on the neuroscience of addiction, so readers get an understanding of how drugs work in the adolescent brain. It's very non technical, it's not scientific, it's down to earth, layman's approach to how these substances work in a child's brain. There's also a chapter on assessments. So if you have a child that you suspect is using a substance, what assessments should you get done? Because you need more than just an addictions assessment. So this chapter goes through the different assessments that you should be looking for if you suspect your child is using a substance like alcohol or drugs. There's also a chapter on what we call process disorders. Um, these are disorders that often accompany a child's use of alcohol and drugs. Examples would be eating disorders and self injury and gaming. So it talks about what are those issues that often accompany alcohol and drug abuse. And then throughout the book, there are warning signs because parents oftentimes don't know what the warning signs are to look for. So the book identifies warning signs for a child that might be abusing alcohol, warning signs that might indicate your child is using marijuana. There are warning signs that might alert you to your child is developing an eating disorder or might be self injuring. So the warning signs are there to help parents know what to look for and what to watch out for. And then there's other chapters that deal with resources and what you should be looking for in the event that you need a treatment program. What does a good evidence-based treatment program look like?
Mhm. Yes, and I find that interesting. You mentioned the chapter on what's going on in the brain, and you said it's easy to understand and it's not very complex or scientific. Have you ever discussed that with the adolescents themselves? Because I'm thinking sometimes just telling a student about how this is actually affecting their brain neurologically, maybe that could be helpful for them to know or maybe deter them from
Well,
experimenting with some of these drugs.
it's interesting that you bring that up because that is the one thing that I found really works with adolescents.
Hmm.
Telling them it's illegal, telling them they might get poor grades, telling them they might drop out of school and never get a job. That goes over their head. They don't pay
Right.
attention to it. They don't believe it. But what does work with them, in my experience, has been the neuroscience. When I
Hmm.
can talk to them about how their brain works, how their brain is maturing, what different parts of the brain are responsible for. And then I can show them how drugs affect those different parts of the brain. And I did that with a lot of teenagers that were smoking marijuana. I would show them the different parts of the brain and what they were responsible for. One area is responsible for coordination, one area is responsible for short-term memory. And then I would show them where marijuana attached itself to the brain, and it seemed like that really captured their attention. So, one of the things that educators can do is at a very young age, starting maybe in elementary school and then reinforcing it through high school, is the neuroscience of alcohol and drugs so that these young students begin to see what the dangers are to their brain. It's the one thing that I think will capture their attention.
Hmm. No, I absolutely agree. And then it kind of takes the morality and guilt and all of that messy, subjective feelings out of it. And it's just science. And they can't you can't argue with the science, how it's affecting your
No,
brain.
you can't. And you're right. It takes the judgment out of it,
Right.
and it boils it down to education and helping that child see the importance of protecting their brain, how their brain works, and then tying that into what substances like alcohol and marijuana can do to their developing brain. It seems that captures their attention.
Right. Absolutely. I can think of a few students who that would be very effective with.
Yeah.
Um, so you mentioned the warning signs for parents and educators to look out for. If they see these signs, do you have any suggestions for how they can approach the conversation with their child or next steps?
I think the first thing they do is have a conversation with their child. Now that may go well, it may not go well, depending on the individual child and their relationship and what's going on. But at least try that first conversation.
Hmm.
If and regardless of how that conversation goes, you need to move to the next step, which is to get an assessment done so that you know what's going on. You know what substances your child's using. You know how it might be affecting their brain. You want to get a neuroscience assessment. You want to get an addictions assessment. You want to get a complete physical workup so that you can get a comprehensive assessment on what's going on and a diagnosis and a treatment plan.
Hmm. Yes, absolutely. And I want to talk, so our listeners here are school counselors.
Hmm.
So I want to talk specifically about education and how educators, you mentioned like the preventative piece at a young age, starting these conversations with students about how their brains are affected. But what else can counselors do to help students? Two things I want to touch on in a preventative way. What else can they do? And then if students are already experiencing substance abuse, if you have any tips or strategies.
I think in a preventive way, counselors can take the lead on helping teachers understand the importance of what we just discussed, which is the neuroscience and how to
Hmm.
get through to students, so that teachers on the front line are aware of the importance of the neuroscience and talking to kids and educating them about the neuroscience. I think counselors can play a huge role in perhaps shifting how we treat uh, drug addiction in our schools, to move away from the just say no approach to the more neuroscience education approach. I think school counselors might be able to lead the way in helping teachers and school administrators see that there might be more benefit in a neuroscience approach, and then consistently apply that throughout the grades through high school, starting in elementary school.
Hmm.
In terms of individual work, what I found in my own practice that what works with these young men and women is to talk to them about the neuroscience on a one-on-one basis, and to individualize it for them, and to take the time to listen to their perspectives. Because so many times when you get beyond the alcohol and the drug use, you find an underlying mental health issue
Hmm.
that's driving that child's use of a substance. For example, many of the young men and women that I worked with in Menninger were using a lot of marijuana multiple times a day. And when I asked them to help me understand why they were using marijuana, the number one answer that came back was, it helps my anxiety. It helps me
Hmm.
with my anxiety. So I think school counselors can play an important role in moving beyond the alcohol and drug use and beginning to help that child talk about the underlying issues that may be driving their substance use. Now, not every child is using a substance to medicate a mental health issue, but an awful lot are. And I think school counselors can play a critical role in uncovering that issue, because so many times we're aware of the alcohol and drug use, but the underlying mental health issue gets diagnosed. It gets misdiagnosed or not even diagnosed at all. And I think school counselors might be one of the first people that actually uncover that issue for parents.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So looking at a holistic approach, looking at the whole child,
Yeah,
and right, a lot of times this is a coping strategy that they're using for something else or to self-medicate,
yeah,
like
right.
you mentioned, a mental health disorder. So counselors can really dig deep and try to find the problem or the issue that they're using the drugs for, and then maybe replace it with a positive coping strategy.
Exactly. Yep. That
Yes.
that would be a good strategy.
Perfect. And what about if we are working with a student? So oftentimes we'll see a student individually or in a small group over a period of 6 to 8 weeks. And if we, I want to ask like how we can bring up the subject without damaging the relationship, because it takes so long for us to build rapport with our students, and we don't want to accuse them and then have this weird dynamic between the two of us. So what suggestions do you have for counselors to maintain that rapport and trust with a student while kind of confronting them on this topic?
Yeah, that's a good issue, because you want to maintain that trust that you developed over a period of time with that child, and the key to that, I think, is to help that child understand that you're there to try and understand their perspective. You're there to try and understand what it is that's driving them to use a substance. Um, and even if you just suspect that a child might be using a substance, you don't want to confront them and accuse them of it, but you can express your concern, and you can try to open that door to help them see that it's okay to talk about this issue with you, that there's
Hmm.
not going to be any judgment, that they're in a safe place to talk about this issue. And and I think another role that counselors can play is in relationship with helping parents of these children who have alcohol or drug use disorders to understand the neuroscience and to understand what's going on. I think counselors play a critical role in this entire issue, both with the child and with the family.
Hmm. Yes, I agree. And what I'm hearing from you is it's almost like as counselors, we're kind of the liaison between the child and the teachers and the child and the parents. So
Yes.
it's kind of our responsibility to bring it all together and make sure everyone has the tools they need to best support the child.
I think counselors have the potential, to be able to be a very powerful influence, not just on the child, but on the family itself,
Hmm.
because many times the entire family needs treatment. Um, but they also can be a powerful influence for educating parents of what's going on, with their child.
Hmm. Absolutely. And do you have any recommendations aside from recommending your book? What could we do to parents as like a parent education piece to spread awareness on warning signs? Do you have any suggestions for counselors?
Aside from my book, I think counselors have a tremendous opportunity to take the information that's in my book and use it as almost a way in which they can set up a program to talk to parents, maybe have a session with parents, and maybe not use all of the chapters in the book, but use some of the chapters in the book so that parents might walk away from a meeting, and maybe it's just an information meeting on adolescent substance abuse for parents, but use my book or the subjects in my book as sort of an outline of what a counselor would want to do in a group session with parents, with the objective that when those parents leave that session, they know more about this issue than they knew before they walked into it. I think counselors could hold a number of sessions with parents, small group education sessions, where parents are given the information that's in my book and are able to walk away thinking and knowing that they understand this subject better than what they did before the meeting. I think that would
Right.
be very powerful.
Yes, I'm thinking of like a parent workshop
Yeah,
type thing. That would be great, just to educate the parents and to give them this material and make it digestible for them, and so they feel confident to approach the subject with their children.
I think that's an excellent idea. I think it would be very informative and very attractive to parents. It's a scary subject for a lot of parents. Many parents don't want to approach the issue. They want to stay in denial, and then they get caught later with finding out that their child is actually using a substance. So, knowledge is power, and the more knowledge we can give to parents in an informal type setting with people they trust, like school counselors, then I think they feel better prepared to deal deal with this issue in the event it comes up.
Absolutely. Was there anything else about your book that you want the listeners to know today?
I would just say, don't be afraid of this subject. As a parent, as a counselor, learn as much as you can about, the information that's in the book. As a counselor, I would recommend that you get a copy of the book and keep it in your office, so that you have it as another resource that you can use with parents. But definitely, it is an issue that is very important out there. We're starting to see in the last 3 years a surge among the adolescent population in vaping, which is vaping, turning a substance into a vapor that the
Mhm.
teenager then inhales. And in the last 3 years, we've seen a surge of vaping nicotine and marijuana. So it's becoming quite a problem out there.
Mhm. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on School Counseling Simplified today and sharing your knowledge with us, and empowering us to tackle this topic with our students and families. If counselors want to find your book or connect with you further to ask any questions, where can they do so?
I would recommend they go to the book's website, which is www.helptheaddictedchild.com. There they can read endorsements, they can read book reviews, they can see a sample chapter from the book. There's also a parent workbook that's a very short, concise workbook that you might find helpful in working with parents. And actually, I recommend that the parent workbook be done with a parent in consultation with a school counselor, so that a parent actually goes through the workbook and then maybe shares that information with a counselor. Um, there's also a way that they can purchase both the book and the workbook. The book's available in electronic form for people who like to read on their reader, or they can order the paperback book. The parent workbook is in a paperback form. That's all available from Amazon, and also you can order it through the book's website. And there's also a link where you can contact me. So the website is www.helptheaddictedchild.com.
Okay, excellent. And I will link to that in the show notes so everyone can
Great.
find it easily. Thank you again for your time and for talking to us about this important topic. Do you have any final thoughts or anything you'd like to share?
No, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to have me on the program to talk about this issue, and I hope that we've been able to provide some information to the school counselors that are out there.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Bye bye.